Hi, everyone. I'm Summer,
I'm Carrie.
and this is Hopelexia Podcast.
Join us to talk about sex, drugs, and self-improvement.
Well, I didn't know if you wanted to talk about when I was dealing with my son, how they,
Oh,
had
yes.
psychopathy, because when we were going to court, they were saying he was emotionally disturbed. And the reason they deemed him, and he'd been at this school for 6 years and never had an incident, never had any kind of suspension, disciplinary problems, nothing. And then he gets this teacher who was just mean to him. And I'm thinking, I'm thinking this teacher may have been wound a little tight. Maybe he was on the spectrum himself. And the irony is he had my older son for, 2 years prior and had been pretty sympathetic with him, understanding that, he had a lot of learning issues and he couldn't follow along in class well. And his academic abilities were really poor. But then I'm thinking, well, you get this next one, he's a little better, or he's actually a lot better. At least he could read. My first son didn't really learn to read till he was entering 4th grade. So he's way behind the 8 ball of fluency and understanding, and being able to read at a pace with his peers. So I have Mr. Hyperlexic come in, and the two of them just butted heads. And I can't remember what happened. I can't remember the antecedent, what it was, but for some reason, my son started banging his head against the desk in frustration, and he gave himself a nosebleed. And he, with the blood, he wrote something. I think he said, "I want to kill Mr. M." That was the teacher's name. And so then about not that same day, but a day or two later, I get nobody called me that day. Nobody said anything to me about the behavior that day. And then I got a letter about 2 days later describing this behavior. And because my son had said he wanted to kill his teacher, they all thought he was a psychopath, and he had said, I'm so mad. I want to drive across the Bay Bridge and kill him. Okay. Now you're 11. You can't drive. You can't drive across all the way over to the east side of the Bay Area on, they might stop you at the toll bridge if you got that far, if you're 11, but they were, the principal, the administrators, they were like, oh, he must be emotionally disturbed and he wants to kill the teacher. Cause this was probably in around the time of Sandy Hook or something like, there was some school shooting that had happened in that time frame. And so they're all looking at him like, oh, this kid, he's, the next school shooter and we got to get him out of here. So they were really on a mission to get him out of the school and into like someplace else in a special day class for emotionally disturbed children. And I'm like, how did this start? What do they think, what is this, and so there was a lot of animosity starting, and I'm like thinking, this kid has never had a problem, and all of a sudden he's with this teacher, and we're at an IEP a parent-teacher conference, and he goes, we had a guest speaker who was talking, and Jared got up and walked across the classroom to get a Kleenex so he could blow his nose during this talk. And I'm like thinking, well, did you want him to blow it in his hands? Right. I'm like, where's the big sin here? And then my more favorite incident was when we were getting close to back to school night, and the assignment was you're supposed to write a letter to your parents inviting them to back to school night. And he wrote, you shouldn't come to back to school night because Miss B, that's the principal, it's actually a big plot, and she's going to take money from parents so she can go to Hawaii. But if you really want to go, it's okay. And the teacher's like, can you believe you wrote this? And I wanted to laugh. That was the most creative thing I had ever seen him write in his entire life.
That was not how I was expecting that story to go.
I know. I was like, what is he gonna write? Something like mean?
Oh my God.
Or like aggressive? No, she's just going on vacation.
Yeah, she's gonna go to Hawaii. She's gonna give parents money to go to Hawaii.
That's just.
At least he tried to warn you and save your money, you know?
It's a scam, Mom. Don't buy in.
He knew what was going on.
And to be fair, I often thought parent teacher night was a scam. So
It is.
So how did they actually end up distinguishing for you that was autism and not psychopathy? Because I know Louie had said she had the opposite problem. They originally had a diagnosis of autism and then finally parsed it out the other direction. So how did that work in your family?
Well, what happened was I got the neuropsychologist evaluation. She was the first one that picked up autism. And in the meantime, and I'm still getting the pushback from the school saying, oh no, he's crazy, and they did their evaluation. And the woman mostly said that he was emotionally fragile and that, he had problems and he needs to be in a more protected environment, that he should, he has depression and he's got like hypervigilance, which he did. Because he couldn't deal with what was going on in school every day with this teacher. And sadly, I have to go to work. My husband has to go to work. And, people say, well, take him out. It's like, and do what? What am I going to do with him? So, part of that evaluation, the school evaluation was correct. Yeah, he was depressed, he was hypervigilant, but we did not agree on the cause. And he'd had issues where, like, I remember when he would get along pretty well with his peers, but like when I would say, like when I'd say, when in the early years, for your birthday party, who's your friend? Who'd you like to bring? I don't know. And I go through the list of names on his class. And I say, well, is this person your friend? I don't know. Is this person your friend? I don't know. And I would see them playing. I would see him playing with these different kids. And I'd say, well, I saw you and Drew playing together. Oh yeah. Okay. So I just pick out kids that, if I was on a field trip and I'd see who he got along with. And he got along with a lot of kids. Or most kids sought him out and would play with them, especially when they were younger. As things got older, then things change because kids get pickier, they get snottier, they realize there's differences. And then they're kind of like a little bit more, no, you're not cool anymore. And you're not smart anymore. Because after he went from learning to read to reading to learn, when you have to go through, when it's a comprehension based curriculum, he was just hitting the wall there. That was really tough. So he wasn't smart anymore, and so in his peers' eyes. So anyway, so I got the autism diagnosis, and they're still fighting me. So then he was also through the school district, he also went to a counselor once a week off campus after school. And and I talked to that counselor and I said, do you think he has autism? And she says, yeah, I think he does. So there was actually a doctor who worked in that office, and he agreed to have a look at him. And then he wrote a letter saying, yeah, he displays a lot of the symptoms of autism. I think that's, reasonable. And then I took him to another doctor, a psychiatrist, and he talked to, and I had him talk to that doctor, and the doctor asked him questions like, do you ever think about hurting your mother? No. Do you ever think about hurting your father? No. Do you ever think about hurting your teacher? No. I mean, he just, and I don't know if he asked about a teacher, but he did mom, dad, and asked him some other questions, and and the doctor basically wrote a letter saying, yeah, this kid is looks to be on the spectrum. So I had 3 people saying he's on the spectrum, but they were digging in their heels, and that's how we ended up to court, because they didn't want to be wrong. But I won the court case.
Yeah.
But they
Well,
spent
not only
so much money.
Yeah. I mean, they oftentimes will spend more money fighting than they would have if they had just provided the service in the first place. And I think part of that maybe it sets a legal precedent. If they just do that, then they'll be like, well, why don't you do it again? Right. So they want to just like, I will spend any amount of money in order to not get you what you want, because then everybody will be asking for it. Like, yeah, maybe because everybody needs it. Like, the solution to that is not to deny students an access to their education in case somebody else might also want access to education, as is stated by federal law, that every child is entitled to. I thought it was really interesting that when Summer said that you and I had the same issue, but reversed, right? My child was initially given an autism spectrum diagnosis when it turned out he had psychopathy. And your child was originally given a diagnosis of psychopathy when he really had an autism spectrum disorder. And I think that actually seems about right. And not right, like that's the way it's supposed to be, but I think it's that way everywhere. Nobody understands the signs of these 2 conditions, and they're polar opposites on the neurodevelopmental spectrum, right? Psychopathy is an externalizing disorder. Everything is your fault, right? And then somebody who has an autism spectrum disorder, right? They sort of like, go inside. It's an internalizing thing, right? And if you look at
internalizing, they may not always understand that they might be responsible for some of the way things turn out.
Yeah.
But, they may think it's somebody else. But on the other hand, a lot of times, because of the lack of theory of mind, they don't always understand that other people have thoughts different from them, that other people have opinions different from them.
And you're talking about people with autism spectrum disorders,
yes,
or psychopathy?
No, autistic spectrum disorder. It's, the theory of mind is one of the hallmarks of autism, that they don't understand that other people have different thoughts and think differently from them, and might not, like sometimes, even, my son will just not give you the whole story thinking you already get it because it's logical, but it's only logical to him. It's not logical to you. And
right.
there's a great experiment that I've seen on, you can find it on the web, or on YouTube. It's called like the Kiehl experiment, where they take these 2 little dolls and because that's a great way to find out if they've got theory of mind, just to that, if the one doll hides something from the other doll when the other doll is gone, when the doll comes back, where are they going to look? And the autistic child, having seen the object move, will say that person is going to look into new space, even though that second person never saw it move.
So here, I'm so glad you brought up theory of mind. There was a recent study, and I'm looking at it right now. Just trying to find the actual study here, but there was a recent study that came out that says not all people with an autism spectrum disorder lack theory of mind, and that it's something like 75% on the, and I'll pull up the study, and at some point I can't pull up things and talk at the same time, but they were discussing about how theory of mind actually is not 100% supported by the research. And what happened was that the person who came up with this theory of mind thing said that this happened, this theory of mind experiment and in using the dolls and, all of that stuff. And then from there on out, everybody just said it's theory of mind, theory of mind, theory of mind. It became one of those things that people say because everybody uses it. Right. And so,
it's a cheap concrete example, but it goes back to like that. Not everybody thinks the same thoughts you do.
Yeah.
Because that's also another piece of it,
Well, and I think and I've actually been discussing this with people who have experience in both autism and psychopathy. And first of all, because not everybody lacks theory of mind because not everybody who is on the autism spectrum has theory of mind. And there are lots of people with psychopathy who actually lack theory of mind as well. So somebody on the argument that's being made by a lot of these people who are taking a look at theory of mind as a hallmark of autism, they're saying not everybody has theory of mind, and we are failing to identify people because we are basing it on a particular thing that not everybody with that condition has. So people are not getting the diagnoses they need.
Well, I don't think you were here when I was talking about in Andrew Solomon's book where he describes autistic spectrum, or a lot of different symptoms that you would likely see in a person with autism. And it goes back to, it's basically a communication disorder. That's kind of the given. But after that, it's pretty much there's a collection. Like some autistic people can write stories really well. Some have really good executive functioning and they can be a good writer, but most of them don't. And, it's kind of like, okay, kind of maybe 75% have an executive functioning disorder, or 75% have this. And you can kind of, when you go into like Andrew Solomon's definition, it takes up like half a page of symptoms. You can almost come up with people that may have these 6 symptoms and someone else has these 6 symptoms. They don't all have the same, they don't all manifest the same way. Like I said, one person could be a really good writer, but probably 75% are not.
Yeah, I just pulled up the study. And one of the things that I think is super interesting about, sort of lacking theory of mind, we don't seem to recognize that many people with psychopathy also have a deficit in theory of mind. And a couple of examples of that is right. So I was communicating with somebody with psychopathy, and they were telling me that they had a friend who was really, really sad. And so their solution to cheer the friend up was to send them a video of a live beheading.
That's unique.
Because they thought the live beheading was beautiful. Therefore, so would he, right? Like she had no concept that it was, that would not be beautiful to everybody, right? And there have been lots of times where my kid will say to me, but I'm putting myself in their shoes. Like, that's what I would do in their situation. It's like, oh, I see. You're assuming bad intent because you're always out to screw me over and you can't figure out any other reason that I would be behaving that way. Right. And so it kind of like it goes both ways and nobody's digging into that. Right. Like how prevalent is it? How do these things that seemingly overlap? Right. How does that happen as we're assessing these children? And yeah, I mean, it's not everybody has it. And some people have it in psychopathy who don't. And so to base everything on that, it's like, I don't know that that's a thing. The type,
yeah, fetuses don't read the DSM.
Right. The title, for anybody who wants to read the thing about theory of mind, and we'll have that up down on the links. It's called Empirical Failures of the Claim That Autistic People Lack a Theory of Mind. And it is on NCBI on NIH.gov. And they break the whole thing down and talk about how it basically is not actually as prevalent as people say. There's a lot of, publication bias. Right,
Can you
which
message that to us? That's a really long article name.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
I don't know if I can remember that.
Yeah. Oh no, I was definitely going to share after we were done. But like, I'll definitely send it after the after we're done recording. I mean, unless do you want to look at it right now while I'm talking, or did you want to look at it after?
Like in general, like after.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
I've told Summer and Lilith before, but like I worked at a facility for there's a few different units, but the kids I worked with they had been sexually perpetrated on and then had become sexual perpetrators. But there was one of the kids that I worked with specifically on the unit, and they were like 14, 15, I think, and they were autistic. And when I was meeting the kids, like I never read like their background or anything because I didn't want that to affect like the relationship I had with them in the beginning. So I didn't know he was autistic until I had started like talking to him, and I was like, "Are you autistic?" And then when I finally looked up his medical records like and stuff, he was. But when I was like asking him about like why he was there and like what had happened and like all these kinds of things, and he was like, "Well, I wanted to do what I did, and so I thought like the other person like would too. Like I wanted to do it, so I don't understand why they didn't want to do it. Like I thought they would." And I was like, "Did you ask them or anything? Like, did they tell you?" And he was like, "No." And I was like, "Did you think to ask him?" "No, I just like I wanted to do it, and so I thought he would too." And I was like, oh, okay, because like the things that he did were like pretty horrific, and I was like, I don't know that another person would want this like done to them unless they like specifically said that they wanted this done to them. And like I tried to explain that to him, and he just like could not wrap his head around the fact that like other people don't want the same things that you do like all the time. And his mind was just like blown, and I still don't think he really understood that after like a year of like therapy and like trying to like process it and like learn. But it just made me think of that when you guys were talking about like theory of mind and how they don't understand sometimes like other people don't think the exact same way you do all the time.
Yeah.
Or want the same things that you want all the time.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how many people are out there, that do sexual assault. Are they thinking this too? Or are they just,
Most of the kids on my unit thought that way. But they like, not all of them. He was like the only one that had been diagnosed with autism. And there were a couple of them that I think would be like psychopath, like have psychopathy, because you would just have to meet them to like understand, because like it's hard to explain like to other people exactly what they were like. But
yeah, I could be wrong, but when I think of psychopathy, I think of someone who has the ability to be manipulative.
Oh, 100%.
And I mean, usually,
It's their superpower.
Autistic people are shitty at, manipulation.
right.
Even if they try
Oh,
it.
That kid
Right.
would try
That's-
it, and he would try to do like what he saw the other kids do. Like he would cry and he would like say certain things,
Yeah.
and then
yeah.
you would ask him about it like the next day, and he'd be like, "No, that never happened." I'm like, "But yesterday you said this," and he was like, "Oh yeah, no, that happened." And I was like, "But
Yeah.
okay, we're gonna sit down
Yeah.
and figure this out real quick."
Right. And see, to use her example, so the patient she was dealing with, he thought he wanted to do that. He thought these other kids would want to do that too, right? Whereas, like in my daughter's case, her thinking is, it doesn't matter what they want. I want to do this, so I have a right to do this.
Yep. Yeah. The manipulation is actually something that Robin and I have talked about. And so one of Robin's functions in my life is I use her to like, do people with autism have this thing? Because I'm pretty sure it's no. I'm like 99% positive, but I just want to check with you to be sure. And manipulation was one of those things, right? I was saying to a parent, like, if your child is that manipulative, let me rephrase that. I don't want to create a beingness, right? Person first language here, right? But if your child has that innate of an ability to manipulate and manipulates people all of the time, and successfully without anybody ever catching on, it's not an autism spectrum disorder. It's really not.
No, because I mean that involves a lot of knowledge of feelings and insights in communication on the dark side, shall we say?
Yeah.
Manipulation.
Yeah.
Because I mean, even if my son would try to do something that was, manipulative, it was usually pretty weak and
Pretty transparent, right?
Because it takes a lot of like abstract thinking to be able to like fabricate the story that you're wanting them to believe, or fabricate like the events that you're wanting to like happen. And a lot of times like people with autism are more concrete based thinking, like factual
Literal.
and like literal. And it's not always like that, obviously. Like there's always exceptions to like everything.
Right.
But that's just like typically.
Yeah.
my
Imaginative
son-
play is an issue too. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And my son, who is autistic, he, even when he would try to like lie about something or whatever, like he didn't want you to know, so he did something because of the overwhelming emotions. It was always obvious, right? Like he might be saying the words, but there's an emotional reaction.
Knows the word, but not the music. Or
right?
Oh my God, that's right. Yeah, no.
My
that's right.
child my child with psychopathy, there's no emotional reaction.
Right.
You could watch her do it and show her a video of her doing it, and she will still swear it did not happen. And there is no emotional reaction at all.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference that I've noticed too, is, there's, even for people who have autism that may have
Flat affect.
I just lost the word. Thank you. You knew what I was talking about. I was like, I just lost the word. Sorry, I have a little aphasia sometimes lately with my autoimmune disorder.
We have the same brain.
But they might have flat affect or whatever, but a lot of times they still are experiencing emotions. They just may not. They may struggle with identifying it or how to deal with it or express it appropriately. For a lot of our kids with psychopathy, they may not even have that same range of emotion. My daughter certainly does not.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's actually really spot on. I mean, sort of by definition, people with psychopathy would have to have that. Like, it's literally what the construct is, right? It's that the things that the error signals that come from, the outside world or even one's own body are dampened. So it's, and you can't ask somebody who feels very little emotion to calm their emotion down, which is what we do in schools, right? You're not like, they need it to ramp up, not down. And then, people with autism need it to ramp down and not up, right? And
right.
it's not
sensory overload. Yeah.
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 Versus sensory underload. Is that sensory underload a thing? I kind of like that.
Like a
Sensory absence.
vacuum.
Well, like in that other podcast that we used to listen to about how not to raise a serial killer, I think in the research that was part of it, is there was like a that the people with psychopathy tended to really need high stimulation to give them a thrill, and so that was, their resting heart rate or something was
chronic under arousal.
Chronic under arousal, right? There you go.
Which is, I mean, so that's the sort of, blanket term. And obviously it's a wet blanket because we're not having fun here, but, that's sort of a blanket statement that all the other things fall into, right? It's chronic under arousal. So they have a low resting heart rate. They have low skin conductance. They have all these things that are dampened. I mean, and the best way to kind of conceptualize that, what that might be like, is anybody who's ever gone to the dentist or I guess anywhere that gives you some sort of local anesthetic, but I think the ones that they give you at the dentist kind of stand out a little bit more. And so, you're walking around with your face is, numb, and you're trying to talk and you can't really talk, and what you're trying to say, but it kind of won't get to your mouth because it's you can't even feel your lips, right? So it's like that, but with your emotions, right? Your emotions, you're walking around numb. And let me tell you, it is maddening. It is absolutely maddening to be in a sensationless body, or to feel a numbness around where there should be pain, because you can't really identify what's going on, right? And it's not a fun place to be with that sort of dampened operating system, if you will, sort of our the operating, whoever loaded up the Lily operating system, whoever operated up the Robin operating system, right? Like, everybody has their own operating system, and people with psychopathy have an operating system that needs to, you have to provide more stimulation, not less. You can't try to teach them to calm down and get in touch with their emotions, because the problem already is that they can't get in touch with their emotions, and they're not going to do that if they calm, because making them feel less than they already feel is not going to be practical or helpful to anybody.
It's like, these are the kids you take skydiving.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
And that's one thing Dr. Kiehl talks about in the Psychopath discourse. He talks about that's why there's a lot of commonly thrill seeking, and why a lot of people with psychopathy, when you ask them about like love, for example, they equate it specifically with sex, because that's what causes a release of the brain chemicals high enough that they get a feeling from it. And I know I'd shared this with Carrie and Lilith before. My daughter told me nobody's ever loved her because she can't feel it.
Yeah.
So because she's unable to feel it, it must not exist.
Yeah.
And that's got to be a really, a really difficult place to be in your own head, because, we have those brain chemicals and those emotional reactions because that's what our brains do to try to keep us safe and to, help us interpret our environment. And so when part of that's deadened, that's it can be a pretty scary, lonely place, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, I was talking to my kid when he was, I don't know, 17, 18, 19, somewhere in there, I guess late teens. And he was telling me how sorry he was for the way that he had treated me. and then said something along the lines of, I mean, you're my mom and I love you so much. And then and not like in a blaming sort of way. And I said, well, if you love me that much, why did you continually hurt me? And he just, oh, no, when I was younger, I literally thought that you hated me and want to ruin my life. And that was his experience. Like, of somebody who, in order to help him, went and plowed through learning 500 pages of special education law. I went through a training program to mentor other parents so that I could figure out what's going on with my kid, right? Like there were all of these things that I did in support of him, and he still was unable to feel the love that those actions came from. And I for one cannot imagine a worse fate than being unable to feel the love from the people who love you the most. I mean, what a lonely fucking place to be. I mean, it's just
And they
abysmal.
they tend to interpret things differently, like we've said, right? Like my daughter, she never said she thought I hated her, but I was trying to ruin her life. Of course, that's the teenage phrase, right? I was trying to, but I was trying to ruin her life by cutting off her communication with predatory adults on the internet. Because I wouldn't allow her to continue to engage with predators and wouldn't allow her to leave and go with them and all of these things. I was ruining her life because I didn't want her to be happy.
Wow.
Because in her head, that's logical, because she thinks she's in control of everything. So nothing's going to happen to her, and she should be able to do what she wants.
Right.
You're making me think of all the stuff I've seen on the on the Investigation Discovery Channel, where, kids go off with predators thinking they know what they're doing and they end up dead.
Well, that's exactly what was going to happen when I found the first time I found that she'd been communicating with some online people, and then there were several times after that. She was talking to them about meeting and things like that. And I believe the plot to murder me and leave in my van was connected to one of those situations. Was they had promised they were going to come, meet her somewhere and get her. And then I guess they didn't set the date, or she ended up inpatient before we got to that date, because that didn't happen. But yeah, and then over time, because this was happening over the course of several years, because she kept stealing devices from other people and being able to get online, I found that she was actually seeking out predatory adults online for this, because they would buy her stuff, because the second she would send them pictures or whatever, then she would leverage that and okay, I'll report you.
Wow.
Which, I mean, it's a pretty resourceful scam, but
not what you should do.
Right.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And to be sure you never miss an upload, make sure you turn your notifications on. And please come join us on social media so we can continue these conversations in between episodes. You'll find us at Hypoxia Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok.